is just fantastic.
Hello everyone, welcome to the Halls of Injustice. We don't do these as often as I would like, and I do apologise for that. This subject though, one of two that I have planned, is worth addressing because this one had ramifications on a national level. Not necessarily because of what the government says they're now going to implement to totally deter people, because that's cute. More national outrage at what had happened because of the complete silence from government officials involved. And I say involved because they inserted themselves, as they are meant to then play a political game that led down a path of rioting. With the new government coming in, this got very messy and made somebody, the Prime Minister more notably, look even worse than he already is. Today we welcome inmates number I at this point do not remember to the Halls of Injustice, these ISO cubes where he will hopefully spend the remainder of his years. His name is Axel Muganwa Rudakubana, and yes, that is a very Welsh name, mostly consonants and a complete lacking in vowels. I'm going to tell you a bit about Axel, and then we're going to talk about the crime he committed. We do have to address the fallout, and at time of recording, the sentence will have been passed. We need to talk about that as well. So who is Axel Muganwa Rudakubana? Well, beyond being a clear and obvious psycho that takes a mugshot like this. When it comes to who Axel is, there is a lot of information available, and mercifully, although someone's going to dunk on this no doubt, Wikipedia has the most accurate version of it. So I know, cancel the video, it's over, oh my god. By all means downvote the video now, I don't care. Axel was born the 7th of August 2006. He was born in Wales and is, by extension, the British people's problem as he is a British citizen. His parents are from Rwanda and they moved to the Southport area in 2013. Neighbours described him as a quiet individual. He was, at an earlier age, diagnosed with autism. He had, as he got older, developed an unhealthy obsession with graphic videos of unalives, which would include the likes of Rwanda, Adolf, and Genghis. In 2018, he featured in a BBC Children in Need promotional video dressed as the 10th Doctor. I know, he called it early. The BBC responded once his identity was made public by removing him from all their platforms, as did the company that cast him. He was also part of a musical theatre group, and Children in Need, for those who don't know, is a charity thing we do every year to raise money for those obviously in need. Axel attended the Range High School in Formby and was excluded in 2019 over incidents including a call he made to Childline in which he said he would take a kniff, yes I said that way on purpose, into school over alleged racial bullying. The NSPCC reported this to the authorities. He did return to the school and attacked a pupil with a hockey stick, breaking their wrist. He was then moved to the Acorn School, which is a specialist education centre. He was enrolled in 6th Form at Pressfield High School and Specialist College in Churchtown, but he was mostly attending via home visits by staff, who were sometimes accompanied by the police. A week before the heinous crime he committed, on the 22nd of July 2024, Axel booked a taxi to go to Range High School minutes before the school broke up for the summer holidays. After a discussion with his father, he returned to the house. He also has, along with his unhealthy obsession with genocide, an unhealthy obsession with making things. This would include ricin. He has obsessions with sharp, pointy objects that I've referred to as a kniff. He has an obsession with harming people. I like watching videos of true crime stuff, yes, but I will never look willingly or knowingly at people being harmed in that way. Real stuff, not movies, it's not the same. Please don't try me. In the case of Axel, he was obsessed with it, and this could be attributed to his autism. It could explain the lack of emotional range. We'll get into that later, I'm sure. Now you know this, we now need to talk about the crime that shook a nation. I'm not even sensationalizing it, because it is legitimately what happened. For this, we go to Southport. On the 29th of July 2024, a mass stabbing targeting children occurred at a dance studio in Southport, Merseyside. 3 children were unalived in this, and 10 others were injured. 8 of those 10 were children. The attack took place at a Taylor Swift-themed yoga and dance workshop that was attended by 25 children at the Heart Space, which is a community studio. At the scene, 2 girls had passed away. 6 children were injured, 2 adults taken to hospital in critical condition, and a 3rd girl died the following day. Protesters the following day had clashed with the police. These protests went on for weeks. This led to the damage of a mosque because of what has been dubbed misinformation and fake news about the identity of the attacker. which at that time had not been made publicly available because Axel was not legally old enough. When he committed the crimes, he was still considered protectable, so he retained anonymity. But the waiver on the journalist's ability to report on it had been removed, the restrictions even, in early August of 2024, so they could cover it. Of course, by that point, there was still a lot of other things going on in the form of protesting, which Keir Starmer was too busy, the Prime Minister of the UK, dubbing all far-right nationalists. There were many people at these protests who were not far-right, but concerned parents who were angry that this event had happened. Now, Axel was actually arrested at the scene and charged with 3 counts of murder, 10 counts of attempted murder, and possession of a bladed article, along with being charged under the Biological Weapons Act of 1974 and the Terrorism Act of 2000. When I earlier mentioned misinformation, the part that makes this interesting is because he was trying to obviously get hold of ricin, and also he'd started a military study of Al-Qaeda training manuals. This is where people lent into him being Muslim. Perhaps if this information had been made available sooner, this would not have gone as far as it had. But it did, and it only got worse. It spiraled. We had Keir Starmer calling anyone that defended these protests as far-right. You had people like Nigel Farage, who had the 3rd highest voter turnout of any political party, but with nowhere near as many MPs, saying there was a clear and obvious cover-up involved in this. So Keir Starmer started going around to mosques, apologising and protecting, offering to protect against Islamophobia, and calling anyone that supported Islamophobic. Because people in this country, many countries, value information, and the lack of information presented, this blew out of control and proportion far too quickly. That is on the government's shoulders, by the way, because instead of seeking to work with people, it has gotten worse over the past 9 months, with no sign of any reprieve, especially since Elon Musk on Twitter started mentioning grooming gangs, and the government, oh boy did they handle that well, and I know it's a separate subject for another day. I'm really sorry for mentioning it here now. Now, another reason his identity was not revealed is because the Liverpool Crown Court cited concerns over the lack of confirmed identity, which then fueled additional misinformation. The recorder who overturned the restrictions stated that continuing to prevent reporting on Rudakubana's, his name's a ball, like Axel's name risked more unrest when he turned 18, which was only a few weeks later. At the time, which also did not help, the Merseyside police were unable to identify a motive. We should probably talk about the government's handling. I know I've kind of mini-ranted a little about it, but we should talk about what the government did, which would never, because it's very rare for a government to get this right, would have never placated the people enough to stop what was happening. Because based on what we now know, and how, for example, the Prime Minister has responded to this, more recently with the guilty plea and such, and his introduction of newer rules on CNIFs, he has yet to learn his lesson because he is clearly far too removed from sanity. Hello everyone, Future Meg. There are some additional details that came out during the statements with sentencing with regards to just how brutal Axel's attacks were. And I will read verbatim what was said, and it was shared all over social media. One of the girls was stabbed 85 times, another 122 times, a little girl 32 times. She was running out of the building when Axel jumped. This wasn't a case of one and done. This is, I've got you, now you're my toy. A level of sadism that is completely unacceptable. I went into this believing whole life order should be considered, but I do know for a fact the UK would never consider it because of his age, which I find to be unacceptable because we don't have capital punishment. This is the best we can do. On to the feckless government. At the time of the crimes taking place, the UK Labour government hadn't been in office all that long, and were immediately put onto the back foot. When they assumed office, they had a resounding majority of representation, but not voters. This was reflected in the fact that Nigel Farage's Reform Party had the 3rd highest voter turnout, or votes for, of any political party, yet he only had 4 or 5 seats in the House of Commons. But Labour ran with it regardless. So when the protests began, they immediately clamped down. They first started by using accusations of being Islamophobic, even though we now know some of the texts he read were Islam-inspired. We know for a fact that the government then went to mosques because of damage done to a mosque. They went to those mosques to placate. Money was alleged to have exchanged hands, and additional guarantees were made to protect, because nothing reeks of equality more than giving others more equality, which is a charitable term for favouritism, to protect cause. Counter-protests did start, and when these began, Labour championed them. Yet when you took a closer look at them, they were hardly any better than the protests themselves. When you incentivise people to bully other people, you are not helping the situation, you are making it worse. And that is something that is a key problem for the Labour government. They did not know how to handle this, so they went back onto their tried and true method of acting like an absolutely elitist smeghead, failing to grasp that the one thing that would have helped would be to explain everything as best and clear as you can without being a patronising prick. Not the easiest task for a politician, because being patronising is in their genetics, so perhaps sending Angela Rayner but without her snarl on her face. That is the deputy leader of the Labour Party if you don't know. Labour sought to introduce greater crackdowns, clampdowns, and of course sentencing people for being in these protests, vilifying, alienating, finding ways to use the law to cancel people for being at these protests, peaceful or not. This was a bad look on the Labour Party, and it did one thing that it should have never done. Whether you be a protester, counter-protester or the government, you took away from what had happened. What mattered was that justice needed to be served for the victims of Axel's horrendous crimes. Something which at time of recording we now vaguely have, although for him there is still hope. I'm not okay with that. There is additional government response more recently, and I should reference it now. The governments have been, UK government, have been putting out statements on a regular basis, getting ratio to high hell on Twitter, and of course on the government homepage. The one thing that matters is that they intend to introduce newer laws because of where Axel got the sharp pointy item from, Amazon, to crack down on people's ability to obtain more sharp pointy objects. Because that's what happens when, you're a criminal. If it's harder to acquire, of course it's going to change the outcome, because criminals are renowned for paying attention to the law. At this point, if you didn't know, in the UK you could carry a butter knife through the street and find yourself on the receiving end of a 20-year sentence in prison, or the gulags, depending on if you said anything mean as well. These crackdowns and the government's response came across as white saviour, white knight virtue signal, gaslighting the detractors into high hell, because that's the best they could offer. In all seriousness, while I will outright state a lot of those protests were abhorrent in nature because of how you behave, the government stoked flames on this rather than seeking a solution that wasn't to alienate and vilify, which in turn led to more people joining reform. Congratulations, by the way. You have 4 years to try and correct that. In December of 2024, on his behalf, the plea of not guilty was entered at Liverpool Crown Court via video link, or during video link. He was mute of malice, for those who don't know, which means he chose not to speak, with a 4-week trial being scheduled for January 2025. However, as the trial was about to begin on the 20th of January, he pleaded guilty to all 16 charges against him. The charges are 3 counts of murder, 10 counts of attempted murder, 1 count of possession of a knife, 1 count of ricin production, and 1 terror-related charge. Justice Goose, yes, that's a name, told Axel that a life sentence was inevitable. Now, in my country, life sentence can mean 2 types. Life with a determined end point, or whole life order. Whole life orders are incredibly rare. Because we do not do capital punishment, which some have, started touting should be brought back. No politician, though, just to be clear. Whole life order is where I would, because anything less would be too lenient. Now, it was upon his guilty plea being entered that finally the media were permitted to publish details of his background. For example, he'd been referred on 3 occasions to the Prevent scheme due to his interest in violence. But although his behaviour was considered to be of concern, he was not accepted onto the programme because there was no evidence of terrorist ideology. An emergency review after his arrest, though, concluded that Prevent had followed the correct procedures. Well, they dropped the ball on this one regardless. It also emerged that in 5 years preceding the attack, the police, the justice system, youth justice system, social care authorities and mental health services had been involved with him, so there were a number of warning signs. Many, in fact. Back to the discussion of sentencing, though. As far as I'm concerned, the only sentence of note that should be accepted is the one where he spends the remainder of his life in a prison cell. Anything less would give him hope and be injustice. It really would be injustice. The UK Home Secretary and resident dullard, Yvette Cooper, announced a public inquiry stating that the victims' families needed answers about what had happened leading up to the attack. Now, we know what led up to the attack. We have the information to hand. All of it has been made public and people have done their digging. Social media is all over this. And the majority prevailing theme is Keir Starmer needs to resign because he knew too much. Keir Starmer has promised to overhaul terrorism laws to reflect the type of non-ideological unalivings characterised by individuals like Axel. We found this out during a press conference, the one where he admitted knowing more and yet still being okay, with what had happened in the rioting and the protesting. He knew what could have stopped it. I understand that he had no choice, but he was stoking the flames now. We now know he stoked those flames. Prevent itself have had a fair amount of negative attention because there's now going to be a review on the threshold at which Prevent intervenes. So with all this information to hand, today, which is Thursday the 23rd, I have been watching the BBC live feed, waiting for information, and it's been quite a long day of observing the live feed to see what is going to happen to Axel, what his sentence is going to be. It's a guaranteed life sentence of some kind, but it should be whole life. We know it won't be. We know it won't because he's too young, which I still don't care about. People can make the excuses. I still don't care. You're never going to change my mind on that. Whole life order, ta-ta, bye. So inmate I can't be asked to remember the number anymore. Axel Muganwa Rudakubana, found guilty on 16 counts or pled guilty on 16 counts, was sentenced to life in prison. Kind of. He was sentenced to a minimum term of 52 years in prison, which means by the time he leaves, if he gets to, he will be 70. Mr. Justice Goose did state it was highly unlikely Axel would ever be released. Quote, for some time he had planned to kill as many people as he could. During the day where this was announced, many statements from families, parents of other surviving children were read out, along with that of the dance instructor who ran the class, and many more people in fact. There will be many inquiries going forward, because far too many red flags were missed, because of a fundamental failing in the system, one that must be fixed. 3 young girls are no longer able to enjoy life. Many others were hurt and will undoubtedly live their lives scarred, physically and psychologically. There are many other problems, of course, that should be spoken of, but the one thing that matters the most is that Axel never sees the outside of a prison ever again. Now, during this day, he tried his best not to be present for sentencing, repeatedly telling the court he felt ill and being quite unruly. He did not care. In fact, he was openly bragging about them deserving it. The full sentence for all his charges, all counts, are as follows. For counts 1 to 3 of murder, life with a minimum term of 52 years, minus 175 days he spent in custody. Screw that, remove it. On counts 4 to 11, attempted murder of children, minimum term of 18 years with the days removed, of course, for time served. 12 to 13, attempted murder, minimum term 16 years. Count 14, 18 months, which is the sharp kniff. Count 15, ricin, 12 years. And possession, count 16, of document likely to be useful to a person preparing to perform an act of terrorism, 18 months custody. Because of the 52-year term, the others are concurrent, which it says at the top there. And I don't agree in concurrent sentences, by the way, guys. Never do. Add them all up. There you go. Bosh. You are unlikely to ever get out of a prison again. And I can think of very few people who deserve to live in one of these ISO cubes for the rest of their lives. You, Axel the Feckless, you're certainly one of them. Enjoy your time. Remember, when the pocket's out, you're meant to hold it.